Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going back in time. We're traveling over 6 decades to a place in the northern Ural Mountains that feels almost outside of modern history.
Soviet Russia, February 1959.
Exactly. And this is where a group of young, very ambitious hikers met an end that was so bizarre, so violent, and so completely shrouded in secrecy.
That it's still one of the great defining mysteries of the 20th century.
It really is.
We're talking about the area known to the local Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl.
Which means dead mountain.
Right, the name itself just feels like this harbinger of what was to come.
Yeah.
And the facts of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, I mean, the state of the bodies, the immediate government cover-up.
It just refuses to settle.
It does. It leaves you with this true enigma that's, caught somewhere between natural horror and just pure human fear.
We really need to stress this right at the top. The people at the heart of this story, they weren't doomed or incapable. This was not a group of naive tourists.
No, not at all. These were skilled hikers.
Right. This is the Dyatlov group. 9 young, expert, and incredibly enthusiastic grade sticky hikers. Most of them students from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, and they were aiming for their grade 3 certification.
Which is a serious undertaking.
A very serious undertaking. Their leader, 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, was an experienced mountaineer, a radio engineering student. They were on a demanding trek to Gora Otorten. They were physically ready, mentally prepared.
And perfectly equipped. That's the foundation of the whole mystery, isn't it?
It has to be.
Their skill level just eliminates all the easy explanations. Getting lost, running out of food, simple panic from being inexperienced.
They were trained for emergencies. They were tough.
Exactly. And yet something happened that made them abandon every single survival instinct they had.
And that something becomes clear weeks after they were due back, when searchers finally found their camp on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. The scene. Well, it defied all logic.
It really did. The tent was still partially standing, kind of half torn down and covered in snow, but it was empty.
Completely empty. And inside, all their food, their equipment, their axes, their knives.
All their winter gear, and maybe the most critical detail of all,
their shoes. All their shoes were left behind.
And if the inside was shocking, the outside was just chilling. Investigators confirmed the tent had been deliberately cut open.
Slashed in multiple places.
Right, and specifically from the inside.
Which speaks to this overwhelming, immediate need to get out, to just flee, sacrificing your only shelter.
Leading away from that slashed tent, they found 9 sets of tracks.
A bit scattered and erratic at first, but all heading in the same direction.
Downhill, 1.5 kilometers down the slope toward the tiny bit of shelter offered by a nearby forest.
And the state of the people who made those tracks? That's what haunts this whole thing. They were wearing only socks, or maybe one boot.
Or, in several cases, completely barefoot.
In temperatures that were dropping below minus 20 degrees Celsius. It's unimaginable.
And that's the core paradox we're diving into today. It's the question that's confounded everyone since 1959.
What force, natural, military, something else entirely, could have struck such intense, debilitating terror into 9 skilled mountaineers?
That they would choose certain death from exposure over staying inside their perfectly good shelter.
It's a total conflict between survival logic and this unseen peril. Okay, so let's unpack this. We're going to conduct a deep cinematic investigation. We'll look at their diaries, the forensic reports, the government secrecy, and the latest science that tries to finally solve this terrifying riddle.
To understand the flight, you have to understand the people. And thankfully, their diaries and photos give us this incredible window into their final days.
And what's so striking is that it wasn't a death march. It was, for all intents and purposes, a holiday trip. They were in high spirits.
Oh, absolutely. The entries from January 23rd to the 28th are filled with this sheer normalcy and humor. These aren't people bracing for doom. They're students focused on logistics and inside jokes.
I mean, on January 23rd, they're already dealing with chaos. Zina Kolmogorova writes about it. They forgot 3 kilograms of salt.
3 kilograms. For a 9-person multi-week trek, that's a huge logistical oversight, but they're laughing about it.
It's classic student humor. They talk about compulsory singing on the train, swearing they won't smoke on the trip.
A pact, I'm sure, was broken almost immediately.
Of course. And Yuri Yudin writes about arriving in Serov and local policemen staring at them suspiciously. He joked that in this pure communist city, they must have looked like criminals, or at least just too energetic.
And Yuri Krivonyshenko, one of the men later found by the cedar tree, he actually got collared by a sergeant for singing too loudly at the station.
These are just such mundane human details. They even organized an impromptu meeting with school children in Serov.
Yeah, they showed off their gear, their tents, their ice axes for 2 hours. The kids were apparently yelling and crying when they left. It just shows you how infectious their enthusiasm was.
And later that night, the conversation turns to love, prompted by Zina. It just reveals the typical social dynamics of a close-knit group of young adults.
Then comes January 28th. This is the last point where the group was 10 people, and it marks the first and only fracture in the group.
They were at an abandoned geological settlement, a place called Second North.
And this is where Yuri Yudin, the 10th hiker, is forced to turn back.
Right, he was suffering from really excruciating knee and joint pain, probably rheumatism. He just wasn't physically able to continue a grade 3 trek.
He noted he also needed to gather some minerals for the university, so he decided to head home from there. Ludmila Dubinina captured the emotion of it in her diary. She said how difficult the departure was, especially for her and Zina.
And it's just this profound moment of irony. Yudin, who had health issues, including a congenital heart defect,
Right.
he's the only one who survives.
He turns back just 3 days before everything goes wrong.
So the remaining 9 press on. January 29th and 30th, they're following a Mansi ski trail up the Ospia River. They even celebrated Yuri Dorshenko's 21st birthday on the 29th.
The cold was a constant struggle, but you can tell from the diaries they were managing.
There was one small incident on the 30th that Zina Kolmogorova noted.
Oh, right, the jacket. They accidentally burned Yuri Krivonyshenko's quilted jacket and a couple of mittens near the stove. She writes that he cursed a lot.
And it shows, minor struggles, the cold, human error. But there's no hint of panic or any kind of external danger. They were a functioning unit dealing with the normal problems of a winter trek.
But the real turning point, the decision that put them squarely in the path of disaster, came on January 31st. We know this from Igor Dyatlov's final diary entry.
And it all came down to the route and that critical choice of where to make camp.
Dyatlov's notes on the weather are, well, they're terrifying in hindsight.
What did he write?
He describes a western, warm, piercing wind, and he says the speed was like the draft from airplanes at takeoff.
Wow. So they were facing a massive wind shear.
Exactly. He notes how hard the walking was, that they were barely managing 1.5 kilometers per hour.
In this exhaustion, this is what leads to that fatal decision. They decided against setting up a labaz, a supply cache, at the tree line.
Which is what you'd normally do. You'd store excess gear and food in a safe, sheltered spot so you could travel lighter and faster for the final ascent.
But they didn't. Instead, Dyatlov chose to pitch the tent high up on the open, exposed slope of Kolet's cycle.
A full 1.5 kilometers away from the shelter of the forest.
Why? What was the logic there?
The general consensus, and what Yuri Yudin later speculated, is that Dyatlov wanted to conserve the altitude they'd already gained. He was preparing for the final push to Utorten the next morning.
And there was another reason, right? Something about the certification.
Yes, he explicitly wanted to practice a cold overnight. Setting up camp in extreme exposure was a way to test their skills and resilience. It was a necessary step for that grade 3 certification.
And he writes about that last evening, probably February 1st. He says, "Dinner's in the tent, nice and warm. Can't imagine such comfort on the ridge with howling wind outside."
That sense of comfort of having successfully beaten the elements, it just makes what happens next even more irrational.
We even have that last photograph, the one they call the Council of Philly. It shows Dyatlov and Zolotaryov and others discussing things, preparing near the tree line.
Right. They were collecting firewood for dinner. It suggests no immediate danger was perceived at that time. They were organized, debating the route, and getting ready to settle in.
They prepared to sleep, believing they were safe.
The plan was a challenging night, a cold night, but ultimately a safe night. They even took their stove with them, but it was found unused. That final decision to expose themselves to the full force of the elements on that high, exposed ridge that sealed their fate.
So when the Dyatlov group missed their return date, the search began. It was a massive effort. Students, teachers, and eventually the military.
And they focused on the area between Kolet Shiakol and Gora Otorten. The discovery finally came on February 26th.
The student who first saw the tent, Mikhail Sherbin, he reported just the immediate shock of it all.
He described the tent as half torn down and covered with snow, anchored by skis and poles, but essentially empty.
And again, everything was left inside. Food, matches, axes, and most importantly, their heavy outer clothing And their shoes.
And if you're a seasoned mountaineer, you know that leaving your tent and gear in that kind of environment is suicide. It's just not something you do.
Unless the threat inside the tent is somehow greater than the certain death outside.
Which leads you right back to the slashes in the fabric. Investigators confirmed these large cuts were escape routes. They were cut from the inside.
Proving this was an immediate, unplanned flight. They didn't even use the zippered main entrance.
And after that desperate escape, the searchers found the 9 sets of tracks leading that 1.5 kilometers down the slope toward the Siberian pine forest.
These tracks were so irregular. Some people wearing a single sock or one shoe, others completely barefoot.
And they were walking, running, sometimes dragging their feet. The fact that they covered 1.5 kilometers like that with so little protection in those temperatures is just astonishing.
It confirms a few vital things, though. First, everyone fled voluntarily at the same time. There were no signs of a struggle or any kind of external attack near the tent itself.
And second, they fled in a state of extreme distress. They didn't take the few seconds needed to put on proper gear. After about 500 meters, the tracks were covered by snow, and the trail went cold.
The first 5 bodies were found near the edge of that forest under a massive Siberian pine. And this is where they made a final, desperate stand.
A stand for survival. They found the remains of a small, desperate campfire.
The attempt itself was brutal. What's truly chilling is the evidence that they tried to get more wood from higher up the tree.
Right. Branches on that pine were broken up to 5 meters high. It suggests someone climbed the tree.
Maybe to spot the tent through the blizzard, hoping they could get back to it.
That's one theory. Or maybe they were trying to break off higher, drier branches for fuel that they just couldn't reach from the ground.
And the victims they found here were Yuri Krivonashenko and Yuri Doroshenko.
They were found shoeless, dressed only in light clothing, some in just their underwear or thermal pajamas. The initial cause of death was determined to be hypothermia.
Doroshenko had burns on his hands and his leg.
Probably from desperately trying to manage that small fire with already numb or frozen hands. Their near-naked state strongly suggests they were the first to die, either from the cold itself or
from the onset of paradoxical undressing, which we'll definitely get into later.
Right.
The next 3 bodies were found scattered along the slope, somewhere between the forest and the abandoned tent.
And this confirms a second, equally desperate attempt, a return trip.
Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. They were all found in poses that suggested they just collapsed from exhaustion during this brutal climb back uphill.
They were trying to get back to their only hope of survival, the tent they had fled from.
And Rustem Slobodin, who was found furthest up the slope, he had an injury that was kind of dismissed at first. A small, non-fatal crack in his skull, about 6 centimeters long.
At the time, medical examiners just chalked it up to a fall, or maybe a minor impact while he was running in the dark.
But the question was still there. If they were so skilled, why abandon shelter in the first place? And why were some of them injured? The official cause for all 5 remained hypothermia, but the reason for the flight was a complete mystery.
And then the narrative shifted dramatically. The investigation basically stalled until the spring thaw in May of '59.
And searchers followed a trail of debris near that cedar tree and found the final 4 victims in a ravine.
70 meters from the pine tree, under several meters of snow, they had constructed a makeshift snow den.
The discovery of Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Kolovatov. This is the moment the tragedy goes from a mountain accident to the stuff of legend.
Because their injuries and their state of dress introduced these shocking forensic anomalies that just proved the initial flight was triggered by something far more violent than just the cold.
Okay, so when those final 4 bodies were recovered in May, the entire case just transformed. The blunt force trauma the 3 of them had, it immediately contradicted the clean diagnosis of hypothermia for the first 5.
This is the evidence that makes that official conclusion a compelling natural force so chilling and inadequate.
Let's get specific about the trauma because it's key.
It is. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol's had major skull damage. It was described as a depressed fracture, with shards of bone literally driven into his brain, an indisputably fatal injury.
And the other 2?
Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov both had severe chest trauma. Dubinina had massive bilateral rib fractures, and Zolotaryov had crushing fractures to his chest.
And here's the truly bizarre detail, the one that just makes experts throw up their hands.
Yeah.
The forensic expert, Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny, he noted that the force required to do this was extremely high, comparable to that of a car crash.
A car crash, yet, and this is the critical part, There were virtually no external wounds associated with the bone fracture.
What does that mean exactly? No external wounds.
Well, think about it. If you're hit by a car or you fall off a cliff, you'd expect to see contusions, scrapes, cuts, bruising. Some sign of the impact point.
Right.
The fact that they were crushed, suffering these catastrophic internal injuries, but without the external marks of a physical blow, it suggests a very specific type of pressure.
Like what?
Like a large, widespread, but still focused crushing force, maybe delivered through a soft medium, like a huge, dense block of snow, rather than a sharp object or hitting a rock.
And then we also have the macabre details of the soft tissue damage.
Yeah.
The body is found in the creek.
Yes. Dubinina was missing her tongue. 2 others were missing their eyes. 1 was even missing eyebrows. And these details, of course, they fuel the most extreme theories. Monsters, secret rituals, you name it.
But we have to look at it forensically.
We do. And while it's certainly disturbing, forensic analysts often caution that this kind of damage can be attributed to post-mortem decomposition.
Especially when bodies are in flowing water for 3 months.
Exactly. Scavenging animals, small fish, or just decomposition itself will consume softer, exposed tissue first. But you can't understate the emotional impact of finding those injuries. They contribute heavily to this persistent narrative of mutilation that surrounds the case.
The clothing they were wearing also tells a separate story of desperation.
A story of survival. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov were found wearing clothes that belonged to other deceased members of the group.
Which confirms this rational but totally desperate fight for warmth.
Yeah. Zolotaryov was wearing Dubinina's fur vest, and Dubinina was wearing Krivonyshenko's pants, which she must have cut off his body.
So the survivors, having fled the tent with almost nothing on, they went back to the cedar where Doroshenko and Krivonyshenko had died.
Realized their only source of warmth was the dead, and started scavenging their clothes. They were cold, they were disoriented, but they were still trying to function rationally, still trying to survive.
And then there's the trace evidence. The thing that has served as rocket fuel for every single conspiracy theory.
The radiation.
Right. Low levels of radioactivity were found on some of the victims' clothing, specifically on Lyudmila's sweaters and Semyon's pants.
Which is highly unusual for hikers in the middle of the subarctic wilderness. And there are 2 major theories here.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's the link to Yuri Krivonyshenko's background. He'd worked at the Mayak nuclear facility, which was the site of the massive Kishin disaster in 1957.
So the argument is that his work clothes retained some trace contamination.
Exactly. And that contamination transferred to other clothing when it was later scavenged and worn by Dubinina and Zolotaryov.
Okay, that's one theory. What's the other one?
The second theory feeds directly into the cover-up narrative. It suggests the radiation came from an external source fallout from a Cold War weapons test. Maybe military ordnance that was detonated nearby?
And even low levels of contamination, if they came from a weapons test, would instantly trigger government secrecy.
Instantly. Which brings us to the final official verdict from the inquest in 1959. Death by a compelling natural force.
It's the ultimate bureaucratic non-answer.
It is. They ruled out an attack by the Mansi people. They ruled out any human attacker, saying the force was too great. But by settling on this vague natural force without ever naming it, they failed to account for the trauma, the radiation, the flight, and they just paved the way for decades of suspicion.
What really turned the Dyatlov incident from a tragedy into a global mystery wasn't just the event itself. It was the immediate, heavy-handed government reaction.
You have to place this in context. This is the peak of the Cold War, the peak of Soviet paranoia.
And the authorities moved with incredible speed.
They did. The case was classified as secret. The entire area was banned for any civilian travel for 3 years, and any public discussion about what happened was suppressed.
Now, the Soviet system often hid domestic incidents, but the intensity of this lockdown, it suggested that whatever killed those hikers, the government felt the potential political fallout was far, far worse than the truth.
And the most damning confirmation of a deliberate cover-up came decades later, from the man who was in charge of the whole investigation?
Lev Nikitich Shavanov.
Right. He broke his silence after the Soviet Union collapsed. In 1990, he admitted that high-ranking officials, he even named A.P. Kirilenko, put immense pressure on him to close the case immediately.
And to deliberately exclude any mention of what he called unknown flying objects and other strange phenomena.
He basically confirmed his team had no rational explanation that fit all the evidence. He admitted he was ordered to lie.
And Ivanov's confession, it directly fuels the military experiment theory.
The idea that the hikers just stumbled into a secret weapons test, which would explain the blunt trauma, the radiation, and the need for a massive military cleanup and cover-up afterwards.
This brings us to a specific theory involving something called parachute mines.
These are weapons designed to detonate in the air just above ground level. They create this massive, focused, concussive force, a pressure wave rather than shrapnel.
And that explanation perfectly aligns with the forensic finding.
Perfectly. Car crash level blunt force trauma, but without external marks. The force is delivered by air pressure or rapidly moving snow and ice, not a physical object that would cause cuts.
And this military test theory also aligns with the most unusual external reports surrounding the incident.
You mean the orbs? Or fireballs?
Exactly. There were independent witnesses, other hiking groups, locals in the town of Evdel, even the meteorology service.
Even the military itself.
Right. They all reported seeing glowing orange spheres or fireballs in the sky around that area on February 1st and 2nd, 1959.
And Ivanov's testimony later confirms he was explicitly ordered to ignore all those sightings.
Those phenomena could be military rockets or maybe the descending parachute mines themselves. But the fact that the government suppressed the reports, it instantly made the military look culpable.
Of course. If you're testing weapons in a civilian hiking zone and something goes wrong, you have every reason to cover up the consequences.
The conspiracy deepens even more when you look at the biographies of some of the hikers. Some researchers have noted that the makeup of this group was unusually specific for just a casual university trek,
Suggesting to some that it was actually a cover for espionage, a controlled delivery theory.
Let's look at the details. Semyon Zolotaryov was 38 years old, significantly older than the students who were mostly in their early 20s.
He had a mysterious tattoo on his chest, GENA, which some have tried to link to organized crime or specific military units. His age and experience just made him stand out.
Then you have Alexander Kolovatov. He'd previously worked at a top-secret atomic facility known only as P.O. Box 3394.
You combine that with Yuri Krivonishenko's previous job at the Mayak nuclear facility, and you have two hikers with strong ties to the Soviet atomic and military complex.
So the espionage theory posits that some of them, maybe Zolotaryov and Kolovatov, were KGB agents. The whole trek was a pretext to meet with foreign agents.
Maybe CIA agents to deliver fake radioactive samples or bad information.
And the group was then brutally massacred, either by those foreign agents or maybe by Soviet forces who mistook them for traitors.
Or the whole operation just went catastrophically wrong, and it required an immediate military cleanup that explains the injuries, the radiation, and all the secrecy.
And that secrecy is the real engine of this mystery. The Soviet system made it impossible to trust the official record. It forced later generations to adopt these far-fetched conspiracy theories just to fill the vacuum of information that the government deliberately created.
So if we leave the shadows of the Cold War, we can turn to science. Modern researchers have revisited all this evidence, and they've tried to provide a comprehensive, quantifiable explanation that relies purely on natural forces.
And the predictable reactions of the human body in extreme environments.
Exactly. And the first key to understanding why they fled is the psychology of extreme cold.
We have to start with those first 5 victims and the link between their lack of clothing and the hypothermia diagnosis.
This brings us to a well-documented phenomenon in extreme cold survival called paradoxical undressing.
Can you describe what that means? Because it sounds completely counterintuitive. Why would anyone take their clothes off when they're freezing to death?
Well, in the late terminal stages of hypothermia, the brain's thermoregulatory system just begins to fail catastrophically. The small muscles around your peripheral blood vessels, which normally constrict to keep your core warm, they suddenly fail and relax.
And what does that do?
It causes a massive, rapid surge of warm blood from your body's core out to your limbs and your skin. And this sudden rush creates this terrifying final delusion that the victim is intensely hot, that they're burning up.
And that compels them to strip off their clothing.
Right, which inadvertently accelerates their death.
So this mechanism provides a clear, rational explanation for why Krivonishenko and Doroshenko were found nearly naked at the cedar tree. Their minds told them they were overheating even as they were freezing solid.
What's fascinating is the contrast, though. While 2 of them succumbed to this delusion, the evidence also shows rational survival attempts by the remaining hikers.
Dubinina and Zolotaryov cutting and wearing clothes scavenged from the dead.
Exactly. It proves that at least some of the survivors were still functionally aware of the danger. They were desperately fighting for warmth, even though they were already disoriented and physically compromised.
There's another widely discussed natural theory that tries to explain the initial panic itself.
The infrasound hypothesis. This was popularized by the explorer and filmmaker Donnie Eicher.
And it suggests the environment itself created the terror.
Eicher's hypothesis focuses on a concept called the Kármán vortex street. This can happen when powerful, high-speed winds flow over a specific kind of geometric obstacle, like the dome shape of Kholat Syakh. It creates these rotating air eddies, or vortices, that can generate extremely low-frequency sound waves, infrasound.
And these sounds, they're below the human hearing threshold, but they're known to have really profound effects on the human nervous system, right?
Precisely. Infrasound waves at certain frequencies can resonate with the human chest cavity and internal organs. They can cause immediate physical discomfort, nausea, dizziness, and crucially,
Induce deep irrational fear. Panic attacks?
a feeling of impending doom. So if the group was in their tent when these katabatic winds hit the peak, the resulting infrasound could have induced a mass psychological panic.
They might have believed the tent was being attacked, or that the mountain itself was collapsing on them.
And that would compel them to cut their way out, no matter what the danger was outside. The infrasound model explains the simultaneous panic and the illogical flight,
But it doesn't really explain the catastrophic blunt force trauma.
not unless they just happen to fall deep into the ravine afterwards, which is a less satisfying answer.
Which brings us to the most recent, rigorously quantified scientific model, the one that tries to solve the crush trauma puzzle directly.
The 2021 slab avalanche conclusion, led by scientists Alexander Puzrin and Johan Gohm.
This model is so sophisticated because it directly addresses the historical arguments against an avalanche. People have always said the slope wasn't steep enough.
Right, the average angle was only about 23 degrees, which is normally too shallow for a major avalanche risk. And there were no signs of a huge snow deposit afterwards.
But what's brilliant about their research is they looked at the geometry the hikers created themselves.
The scientists calculated that when the group dug their tent site into the slope to create a flat surface, they exposed a buried weak layer of snow. And that layer was inclined at 28 degrees.
And 28 degrees is steep enough for a slab release.
They inadvertently built their own trap.
And the timing is key here. It wasn't an immediate collapse.
No, the trigger came from the outside. Those extremely strong katabatic winds, the dense streams of cold air sweeping down the slope, they loaded the area right above the tent with tons of wind-transported snow over several hours while the hikers were asleep.
And this extra weight caused a delayed slab failure. A small, dense block of ice and snow, maybe only 50 centimeters thick, just slid down onto the tent.
And this small, dense block of ice, it provides the perfect mechanical justification for the injuries they found in May.
The simulation confirmed it.
It did. A small, dense slab hitting the tent fabric, compressing the bodies as they were lying on that hard, excavated snow floor. It could generate the localized high-pressure force needed to inflict car crash-level trauma.
The kind of trauma that killed Duanina, Zolotaryov, and Thibaut Brignol.
Their bodies were crushed between that descending slab and the hard-packed snow underneath them, but the fabric of the tent protected them from any external cuts or lacerations.
So if we put this all together, the slab avalanche model explains the trauma, which explains the panic. They cut their way out because the entrance was blocked and they were partially crushed. They fled downhill.
Towards the only cover they knew. And the subsequent deaths are then explained entirely by predictable hypothermia, disorientation, and paradoxical undressing. It provides a very rational answer to almost all of the physical evidence.
But wait, if the avalanche crushed 3 of them, why did the remaining 6 run downhill away from the forest and then try to climb back up the hill?
And that's where the human element complicates the pure science. The panic, the darkness, the fear of another collapse. It likely drove them away from the immediate threat, no matter what the terrain was.
And the attempt to climb back uphill.
That proves that once the adrenaline faded and the cold set in, the survivors realized the tent, even a damaged one, was their only hope. And that led to their final collapse on the slope.
So we're left with this fundamental conflict. 2 incredibly powerful narratives that just sit in direct opposition to each other.
On one side, you have the scientific consensus, the geomechanical evidence of a delayed slab avalanche combined with the predictable effects of hypothermia. And that explains the trauma, the flight, the location of the bodies. It's all quantified with rational mechanics.
And on the other side, you have the Cold War conspiracy theories, supported by the radiation traces, the sightings of glowing orange spheres, and the undeniable verified fact of an aggressive government cover-up.
The military theory explains not just the trauma through a concussive blast, but also the lasting suppression of the information.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Well, the latest scientific model, with its advanced simulations, probably offers the most complete answer for what killed them.
It's hard to dismiss the model from Pozrin and Gom. It scientifically justifies the trauma, which was the key piece of evidence that baffled everyone for 60 years.
It really was.
The 2021 slab avalanche finding explains the tent breach, the injuries, and the subsequent struggle better than any natural explanation before it. But it raises a question that science can't answer.
And what's that?
Why did the Soviet government feel the need to lie about what was ultimately a verifiable, localized natural accident? Why did they seal the files?
And that's the enduring legacy of Dyatlov Pass, isn't it? The true source of the mystery isn't the snow or the wind. It's the political paranoia and the secrecy of the Soviet system.
By concluding the death was caused by a vague, compelling natural force, and then immediately classifying the files, the government ensured that the vacuum of information would be filled with speculation and fear.
They guaranteed the debate would continue forever. They created the enigma through political manipulation.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the knowledge we're looking for isn't just what killed them. It's why the truth, even if it was a boring, localized avalanche, was deemed so politically sensitive that it had to be buried in the snow and hidden for generations.
The legacy is the political distrust that makes it impossible for us, even today, to fully accept the official record, or even the most rational scientific conclusion.
Igor Dyatlov himself wrote in his final entry, just hours or maybe days before he died, "I wonder what awaits us in this trip. What will we encounter?"
The tragedy ensures that we, the observers, are still asking that same question, trapped in the loop of their final, desperate hours. The fear they felt was so intense that they shredded their only refuge and ran barefoot into the deadly Ural night.
And the knowledge we gain from this reminds us that sometimes the greatest force driving a mystery isn't the natural world at all, but the human systems that are designed to hide the truth from us.